Hey everybody, welcome to episode 52. That's right, 1 year of Tactical Crouch podcast. I'm KickedTripod, joined of course by Yiska and Volamel. But we've got a special guest this week, coming all the way from LA, home in LA Valiant Coach Promise.
Cool.
Hey, first of all, I'm gonna get a tat sleeve, and yours is sick. Let's just get that out of the way.
I'm working on it.
That's awesome.
Looks very good.
I got another piece done on my upper arm.
Okay.
Are you gonna keep it black, or are you gonna add color?
Yeah. No, I'm keeping it black.
That's
classy.
Sick. That's awesome. So sorry, audio listeners. You can't.
You just got to tune in. You
just
know?
imagine.
Just imagine.
Yeah, but hey, Promise, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time. I mean, I know that you basically been grinding for however long, multiple long hours every week doing the Overwatch League weekly grind, and then you finally get a chance to kind of relax a little bit, maybe take the foot off the gas for a few weeks, and you decide
That's
to
true.
come
Yeah.
listen to Joe and Yiska talk. So kudos to you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome show. Yiska, you look different today.
Yeah.
You had to bring it up, didn't you?
Let's just
Katie is a me. Yeah. I mean, it was a weird day overall. Starting from, oh, maybe I get my XLR Mini to being called by UPS. Yeah, the address, like the number here, it's addressed to Yiska, but there was no Yiska on the doorbell, so the driver went home, and then I was like, okay, I guess I'm getting tomorrow. And then now I cleaned up, and apparently I threw my glasses away. It's amazing.
Jeez, that sucks.
Yeah, I'm going dumpster diving after the show. I'm looking forward to it.
How badly do you need your glasses?
How blind are you?
Well, I'm nearsighted, so currently it's not a problem. But I probably can't drive a car if I'm being honest, and I will have to drive a car. So,
yeah. Wow. Speaking of just putting damning evidence on the internet, like you can't like go to court now and be like, I wasn't driving without my glasses on, or I wasn't planning on doing that. Be like, well, we have you on a podcast with your glasses off saying you're going to do that.
Just don't get caught.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty easy.
See, Promise now.
yeah.
It's true.
If someone recognizes you that you drive over, you just got reverse. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And
Do you-
forward.
Now it's premeditated. Great job.
Do you have the Chores app in Germany? The one where you can like hire somebody to do like your housework and stuff? Would you just like pay like $20 to have someone go dumpster diving for you?
I don't think we have that. I never heard of it.
No.
I forget what it is. I think it's called
either.
Chore.
No.
But I know there's an app to have like people do like kind of handy-ish type things around the house.
Like, Chains, I need you to fix my fire alarm.
Yeah, something like TaskRabbit.
Yeah. That would be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, cool. All right. So enough small talk. Let's really quick before we talk with Promise here about himself, the LA Valiant, and everything else in between. Let's just get that news out of the way. I have to fix the alarm clock again. So Promise is in the team house. One of the players has an alarm clock, and apparently they don't turn it off unless somebody knocks on their door. So they just let
I
it
kind of want to know who it is.
Yeah. Maybe he'll tell us. I'm going to ask him.
Maybe.
Whose alarm clock is it?
We'll just slip it in.
Yeah. Promise, we have to know. Is it a player's alarm clock?
No, it's Reprise. He's still in bed.
Oh.
He wakes up super slow, so he has like a super loud alarm clock that just keeps going off. Usually I don't mind too much,
Sure.
but today it's kind of the wrong day for it. So if he could keep it off, that would be great.
That's too funny.
But yeah, I mean, so we went through the final part of the playoffs this past week. San Francisco Shock advanced. We've got not a Gladiators. I wish a Titans versus Shock grand finals in Philadelphia. Not unexpected, right? I mean, arguably, if you take, because NYXL is the only one in Pacific, right, and the other two are in Atlantic. Titan Shock.
Yeah.
So
Maybe.
you could definitely make an argument there that those are kind of the best two. Like, I don't know, Yiska, do you feel bad about this grand final? Would you rather seen a different team?
I think this is the best final we could have possibly hoped for. Like it's Jesus Christ, stream. I think that it's a heaven sent that through. I had a tweet that pretty much said this. Mm-hmm. I thought Shock and Titans making it is the best two teams making it over the entire season, and we're blessed with a playoff that probably won't be a blowout or a final, and it's also that these teams that they remained as dominant as they did, I consider a statistical anomaly, or these teams are actually just so much better than everyone else. That through different metas, they were able to dominate the way they did, and also keeping their kind of style of that, right? Like the Shock, when they roll, they roll. In general, the playoffs were almost like a mini replay of the entire season in a sense. So I'm very grateful, I would even say, for that grand final.
What's your take, Promise? I mean, are these the two teams that you think probably should have been there? Like, if you're kind of looking at the strongest teams overall?
I mean, looking at the brackets on my left monitor, it's like Yiska said, like there's no surprising results in there, except for maybe Atlanta against NYXL. That was like the only match that kind of surprised me. All the other matches seem like how I would predicted them to go.
I guess also Atlanta Shock, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Atlanta Shock, but then again, Atlanta throughout this year has always been like the giant slayer, I guess, where they beat a good team and then they kind of fall off again, go back to being mediocre.
I remember some coach telling me, how do you prepare for Baby Bay that throws grabs half map? Like, how do you do during GOATs, you know? Like, it's just, you can't.
Yeah, he would pull off grabs that you just don't expect. Especially in GOATs meta, where it's kind of like almost chess streamlined, where you expect certain moves at certain times, and then Baby Bay just tosses the graph half across the map. It works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So
high risk, high reward. Yeah.
Mm.
So we are going to discuss like kind of the grand finals and break it down in the next episode, because we have 10 days until the grand finals happen. So next week's episode is going to be largely dedicated to that. But I do want to hear from you, Promise. Do you have a prediction, a team that you think is going to ultimately win? If you had to pick a winner here, obviously a whole lot on the line for you here, and you've done a ton of research into it, and we're going to hold you to it.
I have literally no idea. I would think it's 60-40 slightly in favor of San Francisco, but it could go either way. Like both these teams have played each other to map 7 or whatever plenty of times. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes for Vancouver or Shock.
Yeah, it's got to be close. The really surprising thing to me though is that the Shock essentially went they swept. They went 16-0 after they lost to Atlanta. They haven't dropped the map since. Like, oh man, is this just is Doomfist right now just a godsend for Sinatra and the Shock, Joe? Because like that's the biggest thing I see in their dominance is the fact that Sinatra is just, I don't know, he feels like he's playing Doomfist 4 weeks ahead of everybody else. It's like he's had all this extra time on him or something.
I think I think Doomfist being in the meta definitely lends itself to both of these teams doing exceedingly well. But I wouldn't say it's the primary reason. I think that either of these teams, they've shown to adapt across a number of different metagames, a number of different compositions. It doesn't shock me, no pun intended, to see these two teams thrive in this metagame. Does it help that, Huxall and Sinatra are both impressive to say the least, on Doomfist. Definitely helps, but I wouldn't say it's the primary reason. I think it's the the coaching staff, the kind of teamwork oriented excellence that they've shown throughout the entire season. Just two of the most impressive teams that we've seen, I think, in Overwatch to date. Probably, I think I would point towards as more of a more telling reason of why they've been so successful for so long. And to New York's credit, similarly to New York as well, going all the way back to season 1 and seeing how successful they've been there, and how they've kind of returned. They've had a small renaissance in the late playoff run. So yeah, I think just really well built teams, well coached teams, and you get some good results.
Yeah.
The thing is, I'm not sure how much of a heaven sent it is for Shock really that this is the meta, because if you think of even stage 4, they didn't skip a beat, right? Like they were there. We shouldn't overvalue that match against the Titans either, by the way. Like, I think it's pretty clear that they was sandbagging, literally. Like, you don't put repel and whatnot in if you're not. And
True.
It's like still Architect was able to slot into that roster. Now Striker is able to slot into that roster. I honestly think the best that could have happened for Shock was to get a meta that isn't good for Vancouver. That would have almost, like, their coverage. Of course, other teams can get lucky then, but that would have probably been the luckiest that Shock would have gotten. Now that Haxal looks like a cheat code in this meta, it's I mean, it definitely keps the series very, very.
Are you telling me Haxal's got like a game genie or like some sort of game shark and he's just cheating the system? Is that what you're telling me? He just got the up downs going on.
Game shark,
pretty much.
Really?
What was the glove? Was that like a cheat thing, or was that just like some like 90s like weird
the power glove or something like that?
Yeah, game glove, I think it was called.
Something like that, yeah. You're telling me he just got one of those?
I mean, apparently, like the thing is,
glove.
Power glove. Okay, so but the thing is, I honestly think he's still a better player or a better Doomfist from what he's shown than Sinatra. The thing is, he also has to do everything by himself, like in a major way, right? Like the way Shock, for instance, sets up in many ways with halts and whatnot seems to be much more synergistically, it looks like, when they're playing. Haxel just does shit that like nobody else is attempting and is getting away with it against the best team. So I'm not sure if that will actually work against Shock as much. I also think 2 weeks of practice is a lot of time. I wonder who they're practicing against, by the way. But at the same time, I think these matches will look very different from what the quarterfinals looked in terms of, or semifinals in terms of strategy.
Promise, how different would you think that, like, if you were going into like a season grand finals, you've got 2 weeks to prepare, how different would that practice look like, would you think, than like a normal week-to-week type thing?
I mean, first thing is, who can I even practice against? Like we said before, it's like, who is actually still practicing? Because most teams that fell out, the next day you snip and half of your team is in Korea. Like, that's usually how it works for most of these teams. So you would ideally have to find someone that plays a similar playstyle to Vancouver and is willing to practice against you repeatedly. And then I would probably start to practice set plays. If I have 2 weeks and I have only this one opponent that I need to practice against, you can do a lot of very specific stuff against teams, which you don't really have the option to during the season, since you're usually prepping for 2 matches, or some teams chose to only prep for one team because they think they're much stronger than the other team and they don't need to. But in the finals case, I would expect them to hopefully run certain drills. I think that it's very helpful to run drills, but it's not very common in Overwatch League practice scrims right now. Like, most teams, how scrims work is kind of like you show up and then it's like a real match. Like, people play it out like a real match and then you leave, right?
Mhm.
But I'm hoping that if you have 2 weeks of preparation time for just one specific match, and you can like draft maps and you can prepare drafts on maps, that I'm hoping that teams like prepare set plays and actually practice those set plays.
So you said drills. Like, do they actually run like set plays? You just go and reset them over and over and over again?
I mean, I did that in previous teams. Like on Florida Mayhem, I remember like we would load up Cough and just run first fights for an hour straight against teams in GOATs. Just run first fights, reset the first fight after 2 people die, and then just run it again for like an hour. And a lot of the set plays and like drills that you can run are limited because you can't just recreate certain fight scenarios. Like, oh, my team has a graph advantage, so how do we play this? So oftentimes, like, very hard to recreate and like reset and rerun. But for simple things like rollouts and rotations, like you can definitely like reset maps and run it over and over again. And it helps a ton for players. It's just building muscle memory most of the time.
Interesting.
Makes sense.
Well, like I said, we'll talk more about the grand finals when they're coming out next week. We've got a whole show to dedicate to that, so we will definitely discuss it more. But I just wanted to get some of Promise's thoughts on it all. I do think too. I think Shock, man. I think Shock have an advantage. I do, especially
Their
with
coaching
NYXL
staff is
take them to
so
7.
good.
Like, you know, you're right. Coaching staff is so good. Dream in chat, talked about how good the supports are for the Shock right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's
you look at Shock and there's like no weak point. Like all the team, every single team has a weak point. Like you look at the roster, there's always a weak point where you're like, okay, in this meta, that player is not going to perform well. But Shock, every single meta, no matter what you throw at them, they somehow pull out a roster that happens to be the perfect hero pool required for every single meta. And it's so frustrating to play against them and be up against them because it's like impossible to prepare for them.
Yeah.
Do you think there was a weak point for the Titans in any of the metas?
Oh yeah, like stage 3 meta especially. I mean, they lost to us. Like we were the first ones to beat them, which is like very clearly an example of them like being too slow to adapt to what is being thrown at them.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Promise. I want to ask you about this last season for the Valiant. So you came in. So the Valiant started out 0-7, 0-8 actually. You come in. I think it was early April, is when you were signed and stuff. Sorry, I've got chat messages going everywhere. I'm very bad at multitasking. So you start out 0-7. People are kind of panicking a little bit. You come in, since the time that you come in as a coach, I think I've got it right here. You join in the second week of stage 2. Since that 0-8 start, you go 12-8. You miss playoffs by arguably 1 win.
Yeah.
What took place in that kind of shift after that first stage?
I don't know. Like, there's so much. Like, when I parted ways with Florida Mayhem, I didn't have a job lined up. So I just decided it's best for both the organization and for me to part ways. That's just the decision I made, and they respected that decision and gave me probably 5 or 6 weeks, like housing me and feeding me the whole way through and just giving me enough time to find a new job, which I don't think most teams would have done that. So kudos to Florida Mayhem to actually giving me the opportunity instead of sending me on the first flight back home, like instantly. And once I started talking to Packing, and he was kind of in the middle of being the interim head coach and like slowly taking over and slowly kind of rebuilding the structure of Valiant, they were considering picking up another assistant coach. And the second we started shifting the roster more towards a Western audience, like a Western kind of dominant roster, a lot of the Korean players we had and the Korean staff wasn't that happy for obvious reasons. I mean, you don't speak English very well, and all of a sudden most of the roster is English speaking. You can't really do your job anymore. So we kind of, most of stage 2 was really spent rebuilding the trust of the players, because if you go 0-7 or 0-8 even, because we lost the first match in stage 2, it's very hard for players to trust an entire new coaching staff and system. So you have to kind of hold their hand a little bit and like, hey, it's okay. I know you've been hurt over the past months, but I'm here to change that, and I'm here to help you trust in your teammates and especially the coaching staff again. So most of that was just small increments of, hey, I told you to X and you did X and it worked out great for you. Listen, if you listen to me, we can get you more of these success moments. And once you get more of these success moments, like players open up more and they start interacting with you in VOD review. They get more open to presenting their ideas to their players because they're not afraid to get shut down anymore. And a lot of that is just slowly building up trust. It took a long time. And it was probably the most stressful coaching experience I've ever had, but it paid off for the most part for us.
How did the meta changes factor into that? Do you think that the meta also favored you, or do you think that a team that maybe if the LA Valiant didn't develop that structure of trust between coaches and each other, do they still look like a team that might be 0-7, 1-6, 2-5?
Oh yeah. If we didn't change from the ground up what was destroyed essentially, there is no point in showing up for matches if the players like fundamentally don't like playing with each other. And as long as that's the case, like you can have the best players in the world, as long as there's like that one split second of doubt in their mind in game where you're like, you have the choice on Genji to dash in and hope that your Zen has the orb on you, or you don't make that dash because you think your Zen is a trash player and you don't trust him anymore. You know, like you have to build up that trust, and if you don't have that trust, it literally doesn't matter what you do. Like you can be the best coach in the world. If your players don't like playing with each other and they don't want to trust each other, there's nothing you can do about it. You will continue losing matches. And I think with the meta change, I don't think it favored us. I mean, we were never a GOATS team to begin with. So when we got the opportunity to shift towards a Sombra GOATS, that obviously favored us because we don't want to play GOATS against San Francisco Shock or Vancouver Titans. Like, what's the point of showing up for the match when you know before you even enter the server that you lose against them? So the changes with the Sombra GOATS definitely helped us. But I think the biggest change that we needed was adding someone that knows how to in-game lead. And I think that's why we made the decision to trade Fade away and pick up Fact. Because while Fade is an absolute beast on main tank for obvious reasons, like we've seen what he has done in season 1, he wasn't the in-game leader that we wanted as the coaching staff. So having Fact come in and kind of, Fact is like, I always call him like a mini coach, because you slot him in any team in game and he will be able to break down very complex rotations in definite tasks for everyone to do. So it's like one person literally micromanaging most of the team. And once we got the trust established with Fact and all the players were helping info feed for him and were willing to make their own calls as well, a lot of our team play got way better to the point where we could keep up with the top teams. What ended up like kind of being the downfall for us is obviously that some of our players are just not that good mechanically compared to their counterparts. Like if you look at the roster of San Francisco Shock, like who is really a weak point mechanically in a GOATS meta there?
Right.
So I think maybe with better players we could have done a lot better, but I think we got like 98% out of what we could have done as a coaching staff. I don't think we could have done much more than that. Most of what ended up being a downfall for us happened in stage 1, which was out of my control, which was out of Packing's control, Stoop's control. Like we did what we could with what we had for the most part.
Right.
Freaking reprises. I love how you can just hear the boop boop every like 10 minutes or so.
I don't understand why he doesn't turn it off completely. Like, just turn it off.
Just turn.
He just keeps hitting snooze and turns around again.
Katie like sets like 5 alarms in the morning, and I don't have to wake up early, so it's like from 5:30 to 6:15. It's just straight alarms, and I can go back to sleep until 9. Like, come on,
it's all good. It's barely.
I just think it's funny.
It is.
Yeah. Joe, I know you had. I mean, Yiska, do you have any questions kind of regarding the LA Valiant season so far? I mean, it's like I said, it was definitely one with highs and lows for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of discussion with your general manager and head coach both at the same time. Not everything in the feature piece can make the cut, so it was interesting to see. They also sort of broke down the different roles. Of course, it cannot be that extensive.
Of course,
so I think it makes sense for you to address what you were specifically tasked to do in the Valiant and what you ended up doing as well, right? Which is not always 100% the same thing, even though I do think that the Valiant are better at this than other teams, where coaches have clearly defined roles. Not as much in other teams, where it's more like, okay, everyone scramble, figure out where you can apply yourself, and you got to figure it out yourself.
So in that sense, if we can we kind of define exactly what hat you wore? What was like your day-to-day exactly? Were you specifically strategic? Were you more hands-on with the players? What exactly was your day-to-day like?
Previously, I mostly did macro strategy for most of my teams. So when I came to Valiant, Stoop was already like super dug down deep in the macro strategy role, so he was already settled in there. So there wasn't much sense for me to come in, pull him out of that role, and slot myself in and give him a completely different role, because he would end up with 2 coaches learning 2 different roles.
Yeah.
So I transitioned into player development. So you saw KSF kind of bloom and finally show what he can actually do. That's mostly me doing like player feedback with him. Like, I think stage 2 the entirety of stage 2, I worked with nothing but KSF pretty much. Stage 3 was the stage where I got demoted to being a Sombra coach and basically had to somehow teach Shax how to play Sombra in like 2 days before our first match. And when that meta kind of shifted in stage 4, where we were experimenting with KSF Sombra, I ended up coaching him a lot of Sombra. But most of my work was kind of figuring out a structure for player development and kind of streamlining the process so that any coach that we might add further down the road, like Reprise, can just slot into my system that I developed and kind of start working instantly instead of slowly figuring out what to do. So most of that for me was player development. Stoop did all the macro strategy part. Packing was doing the head coaching task as much as he can, like talking to players, making sure they're comfortable and happy and they have like no concerns, any doubts, whatever. Like, he would deal with all the emotional parts so that all the other coaches could just focus on strictly in-game. That being said, obviously Packing, it's like how I always describe our coaching staff. We're kind of like a boys club where there might be roles technically defined, but we don't really stick to those. Like, if Packing wants to bench a player and all of the other coaches completely disagree, he wouldn't bench the player despite our wishes not to. He would just be like, okay, I trust you guys. I'm not going to go through with that decision because I respect you enough to not like run over your opinions. So it feels much less of the traditional, oh, there's a head coach above me. That's his plan. I just follow along whatever he tells me to do. It's more like all of us chip in and everyone has their part and everyone trusts each other enough to take a backstab if that's in favor of the team, which makes working in this coaching environment probably the best time I've ever had in terms of like coaching quality compared to all the other teams I worked with before.
So you'd say that this was, in one hand, the most challenging, but also the best kind of structural.
The season has been extremely fun, super fun. Like every single match we would show up and we knew from the get-go if we're going to lose or win, just because we were realistic enough to know at what level we are right now, because we're all good coaches and we communicate clearly with the players what we want them to do. And like when we showed up for Vancouver Titans, I think that was the only match where we generally didn't expect to win, and we were just like, fuck it, we'll try our best, see what happens, and we ended up winning like super convincingly, which was like a super good morale boost for the entire team, because that was like the first win. That was like the turning point for us where we're like, okay, we're an actual good team now. We're not the 0-8 kind of garbage team that people make fun of all the time. Like we can compete at the top if we try hard enough.
So take me, indulge me for a moment, take us back to that match, map 1 and 2, things go, relatively well for you guys. The players come back into the locker room. What's the general consensus from the coaching staff? Like what changed in your message to the players? Because like you said, it sounds like you went into the match, pretty, expectations are we're probably going to lose. We understand that. Here's, we're still going to stick to the game plan, but what did anything change? Was it still like, okay, this is what we've drawn out. This is what we're going to stick to. Maybe a little bit more of a morale boost. Like this is actually going to happen. We can actually do this. Like take us through that.
I think most of what happened in the halftime in the Vancouver match was, okay, guys, chill. You're doing well. But the worst thing you can do now is get overconfident and cocky and try to throw you a lead in the next match, especially halftime breaks, which is why I have like a love-hate relationship with halftime breaks. To a certain degree, they give you an option to adapt players again and like kind of shift them around. But at the same time, it gives the tempo lead that you have away to the enemy team, and they get to like mentally reset again and come out and potentially like shift the tempo in their favor, which you don't want them to do. Ideally, if you are on a hot streak and you're winning map after map, you want them to feel that and be like, shit, we're losing left and right. What do we do? There's no one. Like coaches in halftime break, I think have like the most impact out of the entire game, because you can shift so much around if you're a good coach and you know how to like streamline what players need to do. Obviously, that doesn't work every single time. For example, the Gladiators match in stage 4 that we lost, we predicted pretty much every single thing from the coaching staff that they were going to do. And players were aware of that. And we even went into the match with the thought in our head, okay, this is what Schurfer is going to do. This is how we react to it. And this is how we beat it. And players go in game and boom, head is empty and they just do whatever they feel like. And in halftime break, you try again to like drag them out of that mental slump. Boom, same thing again. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do in halftime, but most of the time it's just like calming players down, making sure they don't get overhyped or they don't doubt themselves too much.
Sure.
But yeah,
just quickly going back to the Vancouver game, I know that we talked about players buying into the coaching staff after a big kind of a slump, we'll say. Was you mentioned that as a turning point? Did you feel like after that victory, after that kind of major upset, being the first team to beat them in the regular season, did you see a big turnaround in terms of like player morale? Did they start to buy in a little bit more, or was that already kind of leading up until that point? And do you think that was what pushed you over the edge?
No, I think the players at that point were already like blind trust. Whatever we told them to do, they would just be like, okay, cool, I'll get it done. Like there was no questioning, or if questions came up, it was more of a respectful, hey, I think this could be good from like a player's perspective. It's important to know how the players feel like, and we continuously ask them and encourage them to come out of their shell and actually like disagree with us, because as much as it sucks to be wrong as a coach, I would rather be wrong and get the right thing from my player and implement that and win a match, rather than put my pride like in front of a player and be like, no, you're wrong, like I'm right. So they were buying into it completely. I think that was just the confidence boost that they needed. Because if you lose that much, you start doubting yourself as a player. You think you're not good enough anymore. You want to get traded to a different team. That's like the typical concerns that you have when you start losing. It's kind of like, it just happens. Like there's so much stuff that happens from losing, where once you start winning, and such a big win is like the break point where you're like, okay, I'm a good player, we're a good team, we can do this if we just keep working hard and we keep going from match to match to match. It's just like Packing always said before the match, every single match in our season was a playoff match. Every single loss we would get would in the end mean we would not make the end of the year playoffs. So every single match was treated by us as the most important playoff match. There was like no downtime. And I think, especially for me, I went from coaching Mayhem Academy in October with no break into OWL, quitting at Mayhem, getting like 3-week break, and then going back into OWL. So I've been coaching for like a year straight now, every single day, which is pretty exhausting at some point. So I'm glad that I get a break finally.
So you get to come hang out with us.
Hell yeah.
Tell us all your secrets.
I don't think I should do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Might get me in trouble with management.
No, we don't want to get you in trouble.
Did it feel like you lost the play-in participation actually against Gladiators, or was it already that like the games against Spark and Seoul that were very close, right? The 3-2s?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Seoul match was like the most frustrating one because we came into that match knowing we're the better team and we should have won that match, realistically speaking. But it's like, it was just one of those days where the players kind of feel like a little bit antsy, and like midway through the match, they kind of lose concentration and things go, especially in matches when you can't really talk to them that much. The second something goes wrong and there's no player stepping out and being like, listen, calm down, shit happens, this is what we do to prevent that from happening. That's when things spiral out of control, because once things go wrong, things go really wrong. Because you don't really take the time. Like, your mentality shifts from how did this happen and how do we prevent it from happening to, oh shit, it happened, we're trash. Like, that's usually how players think. Like, they don't take a step back and kind of slowly analyze the situation like a coach would do. They kind of get emotional, and I think that was just one of these days. I think that was the most frustrating loss. But at the end of the day, we didn't really expect to get that close. Like, when we initially started shifting the team around, we were just like, okay, we hope we get some mediocre stages, and next year we kind of like restructure the team a little bit and see what we can do with it. But once we actually got that close, I think like every single loss was like a huge hit, because players had like these high expectations, like we're going to go into play-ins and we're going to stomp play-ins and we're going to get into playoffs and we're going to do well and show everyone the kind of team we are. But especially like the meta shift just kind of made it even harder. Especially the stage 4 meta was just not exactly our meta. We didn't really have a Reaper player. We had a good Mei player, but we couldn't really play around it that much. And then we had Fact on Orisa, who's like more comfortable on Ryan and Winston, where he can like take charge and like lead the team and call the rotations. Everything that kind of made us successful in stage 3 kind of broke apart in stage 4. So we had to restructure the team and how we play the game again. Because if you play for months in a row relying on your main tank player to be the main shot caller, and all of a sudden he's put in a role where he can't be the main shot caller, and if he tries to be the main shot caller, you are actively hurting the team. It's kind of rough. Like, I think that was, realistically speaking, every time someone of us says, oh, well, how did we lose X match in stage 4, whatever, I'm like, how did we lose 8 matches in a row at the beginning of the year, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially in stage 1 with GOATs, where a lot of the teams were, to be honest, like not good at GOATs, and a lot of the contenders teams were much, much better from like a GOATs fundamental standpoint, not as much mechanics. I think that if you would have had the coaching staff we have right now in stage 1 with the players we had, even with Faden and everyone still being there, we would have done a lot better just by having good coaching and making sure they know what to do on GOATs. Because when I came in that team, they just didn't know how it works from like a fundamental perspective.
This leads me to a question that I've been thinking about a lot recently. And my current conception of it is, unless you're super stacked, and even in those cases, it seems like, especially at the start of a meta, a lot of it is gamble.
Oh yeah,
just like for instance, like you just explained, like when Fact cannot shot call anymore, that's a idiosyncrasy of your team. There are infinitesimally many ways the meta could have shifted and what Blizzard could have done, that you cannot prepare for these situations. So do you think essentially like good coaching staff can probably grind back into the meta and reteach these players like these things, but you can ultimately not find anything or have any vaccine against a meta hitting you badly?
No, I don't think there's much you can do. I think in stage 4, I think Spark was like the best example that showcased that sort of behavior perfectly, where they had a super slow start. They were a super bad team. Everyone ranked them at the absolute bottom of all power rankings. And midway through stage 4, all of a sudden they completely change and rise up. And that's the coach, like we scrimmed them a bunch, and you can clearly see the coaching staff like slowly implementing like certain fundamentals, and players adapt and learn from their mistakes, which is why I'm not a fan of like meta changes so frequently and so shortly before stage starts, because the stage 4 meta shift basically meant for all playoffs teams that were still playing on the old patch, basically meant you had like barely any time to practice. So a lot of the games that you came into in stage 4 were basically you roll the dice and hope your players happen to have like a natural feeling of how they're supposed to play in the meta. And if they don't have that natural feeling, you got to start from scratch basically and build them slowly back up, which is why I'm more of a fan of like League of Legends, where Riot Games make sure like a certain patch is set. And even if they're like 4 patches ahead on the live servers, all the competitive teams still play that patch from 2 months ago. If that means it basically ensures competitive integrity, and all the practice that you've had still applies. Like stage 3 and stage 4 meta were complete opposites. So we went from a super strategic rotation focused meta to DPS have to frag out and you tanks are basically buying time. And that's kind of like, if you have these shifts, you can basically just hope for the best and hope you can scrape in wins against other teams that also struggle. Or you're Washington Justice and you happen to have like the perfect meta for your players and you just dominate a bunch of matches. For a coach, that's like the worst part about coaching Overwatch, is how frequently it changes, which is why you see with like 4 people. And in other games, you see a single coach, because the game just doesn't change as frequently. And you don't have to have 2 coaches looking at your players individually, and then you have Stoop doing macro coaching, and you have Packing kind of keeping the mental of players in check, because if you start performing worse in the new meta, you're going to start doubting yourself again, and you have to handhold people. Then you have scouting reports and everything. It's like Overwatch is very coach driven, and a lot of the Overwatch League teams that do well are usually teams that have at least 1 or 2 good coaches. Just because a team does well doesn't mean every single coach on that team is good. Like there's always exceptions. Just because you're a losing team doesn't mean your coaching staff is necessarily bad, and just because you're a winning team doesn't mean your coaching staff is good. But I think I'm hoping a lot of organizations are slowly realizing how high the value of good coaches are, and they start investing more into coaches rather than players, because right now it's the opposite. Players earn a lot of money, the star players, and coaches are kind of left at minimum or slightly above minimum unless you're a head coach. So I'm hoping that it kind of shifts, which is obviously to a certain degree kind of selfish because I'm a coach.
Yeah. But you also understand the value that you bring to a team, right? And that's, you're totally right to be able to, like, you can speak exactly to the value that we bring. I mean, we've seen, the value of coaching, even
there's tangible value, is there? Yeah.
Like even with the Valiant, right? Like you can actually see and draw direct conclusions between changes and additions in the coaching staff to direct improvement, not just in the win-loss column, but also in, just kind of the players' mental health as they, go through, or I guess I wouldn't say mental health and like crazy
Morale.
way, but the I don't know what the word is.
Describe it.
When they can
Be happy.
They can weather difficulties better.
Yeah. I think the best way to put it is players come and go, but a good coach will be able to adapt to any sort of meta, anything that Overwatch or Blizzard can throw at you. As a coach, you will be able to adapt to it once you understand how to coach and you have like a good like game understanding. You're going to be able to slowly figure out every meta, because every meta change is just like for players, coaches are sitting down and slowly figuring out, like, we don't know what to do when all of a sudden Sigma is being introduced. Like, we don't know how Sigma is going to play out and how he's going to fit in the meta. So we are just, it's basically a good coach streamline the process of figuring out a meta and working with the players. That's kind of what you have to have in your skill set for a coach to be successful.
Joe, you want to go? I know you had some questions about the 2020 season.
Yeah, this kind of transitions nicely. You mentioned that you hope that in the future, coaches are a little bit more highly valued, maybe needs to kind of shift the power structure almost behind the scenes, the meta power structure almost. Going into 2020, they're introducing obviously more and more travel. Do you think that could lead to that happening with how much travel is going to be invested? Do you think more teams are going to bring on even more coaches? Do they double down on the coaches that they already have? How do you think that affects basically your job in traveling?
I think teams are probably, I think in general, Overwatch League right now is shifting towards looking at their rosters again and kind of figuring out where like the cost effectiveness is. Like if you spend 250k on a player and he doesn't carry your team 1v6, why do you pay a player that much when you could probably shave off 150k on that player salary, hire someone that might be slightly worse, but you have good coaches that can kind of build them up to a similar level. And I think I'm hoping that a lot of the teams are going more into long-term rather than short-term, how it used to be, especially with travel games. You kind of want to lock people in to definite contracts if you have that much of an unstable environment where you're like flying around the world all the time, like you're shifting places. I would think that managements are starting to be smart enough to be like, okay, we need some sort of consistency in our lineup, and you don't get consistency from players. Meta shift, hero pool shift, you fall off, you start becoming better. But one thing that stays consistent or should stay consistent is good coaches. Good coaches are always going to stay good coaches. Someone like Krusty, you can start him in any single Overwatch League roster and he would do just fine with whatever players you give him. Obviously, maybe not to the success of San Francisco Shock, but he will always do a good job and you will always get good value from the money you spent, pretty much. I'm hoping that will be the case, but I also know that a lot of the organizations are still figuring out how to make money off Overwatch League. So there's going to be continuous shifts in contract salaries and expectations. I think in season 1, everything was kind of like, oh, here, take all the money I have. I don't care. Teams are starting to realize, I don't know if that's the right thing to do. That's why I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of changes coming to teams in the off season. A lot of changes.
When it comes to those off changes, how do you predict or how do you expect the travel in the 2020 season to affect roster building? Do you expect rosters to get bigger? Do you think they're going to get smaller? More coaches being added? How do you kind of think that's going to play?
I don't think there's going to be more coaches. I think at a certain point, too many cooks definitely applies to Overwatch coaching. I think we found a good structure and with 4 coaches as we have right now. We have packing head coach, Stu macro strategy, I do player development, and Reaper is like our scouting kind of shifting coach. So sometimes he helps Stu with macro, sometimes he helps me with player development if my workload gets higher. Sometimes he just disappears in his room and does like the scouting reports because they take a lot of time. And I think we have the one coach that is kind of rotating in between wherever he he is needed. I think if you would go beyond that, it wouldn't work out for our structure, but maybe there's someone who has a coaching structure where you want to have 6 or 7 coaches. But I personally don't think that it makes much sense, because let's say you've Dallas Fuel with a main tank coach. I do player development, and you can't tell me that a main tank coach is going to have a workload that is worth paying him the salary he's probably receiving throughout the entire year. There's going to be times where you have fact fiction in stage 3 where he just perfectly fits the meta, where I don't even have to talk to him ever, because he just knows what he has to do and he's continuously improving on his own. But then you have a player like Shax who's trying to learn a new hero, and you have to spend much more time on that. So I don't think role specific coaches do enough to like value them enough to actually like warrant their salary. So I don't think there's going to be more coaches, and I don't think there's going to be super large rosters either, because travel expenses just rise up, and I don't think there's much point. I think you're going to see rosters with 2 backup players maybe for important roles that you have to have backup players. For example, we would want a backup player for someone like Karif in case he falls out. So we have someone that is like somewhat comparable. I think you should have backup players for the players that are important to your roster, to word it that way. There's going to be standout players that you rely on. So if you have a backup player that is somewhat at a similar level, or you can coach them up to a similar level, I think that's important. Or I think we are thinking of going in that direction of having a backup player that might be worse than my starter right now, but slowly kind of making him almost like an apprentice, and like slowly building him up to the point where a player like Fact Fiction, who might be, he's like an older player, like that's just how it is, that at some point we know that he might not cut it anymore. And so having someone on the bench that is a backup player for him that we can slowly help build up, and Fact can teach that player as well, I think that's like super beneficial. And I think that's kind of how we're at least thinking of the backup roles. But you see Seoul Dynasty, they have like ever shifting rosters. You see San Francisco Shock, they make use of that roster. So maybe that's just their style of coaching and they want to keep that. So they might just take that into next season. But I think it's very team dependent of what they value in having backup players.
I guess the next concern or question that I think we've both, I think all 3 of us have really all kind of questioned once we hear some of the feedback from the homestands is how are you kind of picturing practice on the road? Because we've seen, or we've heard through the homestands that practice hasn't been fantastic, right? Yeah. Pretty hard. So how has that been something that's been discussed internally with the Valiant? Do you think that other teams have started to really kind of iron out what they want to do? Is it laptops? Is it, plug and play USB VOD review on a projector? Is it flying out a whole contenders team? Like where do you think the meta game of practice is headed? Where do you think that's going?
I think most of that comes down to the teams organizing homestands. Okay. Because like I can't influence what I'm working with in terms of like practice facility wise there. Like when we came to Dallas, it wasn't necessarily bad, but I think the overall level of games, like the quality of games will tank. Like that's a guaranteed. If you travel that much, you're not going to have the practice time that we have right now where we scrim 2 to 3 blocks every single day. That's not going to be there anymore. But I'm hoping that teams that host these homestands really do go out of their way to provide as much practice quality as they can. And I think most teams will probably default to like laptops on the road or something like that.
Something portable. Something
mobile and portable. But I think most of it will still come down to the homestand venues. Some are worse, some are better.
Can I address? I saw Brad mentioning that he expects, for instance, players to VOD review on stream. I think that is a really unrealistic situation. So what do you think? Like how will practice have to shift? Like what what new duties will come towards coach, because I can't see coaches doing that, right? Like unless they get seasick from it or whatever. Like watching footage on the plane, that makes sense for them. But I don't think you can even have like any coaching sessions. It's just travel otherwise, right?
Yeah, I think like for me right now, travel games, like some people, like some players look at them like, oh, ask them, how much did you actually travel? And they're like, well, I almost never left the United States in my entire life. I'm like, yeah, you're going to change that opinion real fast. Long haul flights are not fun. Anyone who's ever sat in a plane for 9 or 10 or more hours knows how extremely exhausting it is, and like jet lag is going to come in. So I'm not going to expect my players to sit in a plane and review their own VODs. That's never going to happen. I want them to kind of chill and survive the travel as much as they can. And I think then I think the biggest challenge is going to be streamlining and kind of breaking down the time you spend and spending it as efficiently as possible, which we personally have been doing already. Like we are not afraid to cut a block or cut VOD review if we don't think we get anything out of it, because why would I subject my players to additional hours when they don't do anything, right? It's like, why would you have someone sit in the office for 9 hours when you get the work done in 4? Like, what's the point? So I think a lot of it will come down to how good is your mobile setup and how well can you deal with jet lag. I don't think the flights itself are going to be much of a problem, but how fast can you get all of your players to be at their mental 100%? That's going to be the biggest challenge. And I don't know the answer yet. I have no idea how that's going to work out. I think that's for everyone with travel games.
Sure.
Who knows how it's going to work out?
How much? So, for instance, now we of course switching from a Thursday to Sunday schedule to a Saturday Sunday schedule, right? How impactful is it to just have those days? So, for instance, if you're playing on Thursday and you're playing again on Saturday, can you really impact a lot? Is there a lot of impact you can have, and in terms of what you can coach? And how does that change towards next year's schedule, where it's like maybe you need to play? I'm not sure if you play twice a day. I don't think that's the thing, but you definitely play 2 matches. Saturday, Sunday, back to back, yeah.
I mean, obviously, as a coach, you're not a fan of playing 2 games in a row, like back to back. It's exhausting for the players. They don't get a mental reset. You can't really do much about their current level of game understanding anymore. You can't really do a lot in, like, if you play Thursday, then you have Friday scrims, and you play Saturday again. But it's, for us, at least as coaches, it's reassuring to know that I get a full day of going over the same things I've preached for 4 weeks already again, and making sure that they've heard that before the match starts. Because if I get a full day of scrims where I can drill it into them again, and then I get additional time before the match where I can drill it in again, and then I get a warm-up where I can drill it into them again, the chances of them retaining most of the information is higher than having no time to talk to them. So while there's not a lot you can do, for me as a coach, it's kind of like calming to know that I have the opportunity to talk to them rather than not having the opportunity. But at the end of the day, I think most of the quality of the matches will still come down to how well practice is going to work out. So I don't think the Saturday, Sunday schedule is going to have that much of an impact. I think players are going to get used to it after a couple of weeks of playing back-to-back matches. It's just a matter of shifting around. I think it's much worse to how we had it this year, where 1 week you play back-to-back matches and the next week you play 1 match. I think that's much, much worse than having consistency in it.
Yeah, I get that. Joe, do you have any other questions about kind of like the 2020 season?
I think I got most of mine. It is very hard to predict. It's hard to say exactly where things are headed. I don't know if we want to jump back into, what happened with Valiant. Was there a team that you'd say you had a hard time or had fun preparing for in the regular season? Was there a team that was unique in that sense?
I think Gladiators is always a challenge to prepare against because the coaching staff as a whole, they're kind of like us, like in the sense that they don't really care of what other teams do. They just do their own thing. And if they think that they're on the right track and they do the right thing, they just keep going with that. Even if you look at some of their plays and you think that's absolutely ridiculous, like why would you do that? They still pull it off. So you still have to go into the match with the mindset of they will throw anything at you and they have no shame about it. They don't care. Like if they want to play May, Bastion, Reaper, Bunker or whatever, like they'll do it. Like they don't care. So you have to kind of be ready for everything. It's much easier to prepare against a team like Vancouver where they play like very standard, streamlined. That has been a game and that has been a thing in like any game. There's teams that tend to favor the more standard play, and there's the teams that like cheese their way through the brackets if they have to. So I think Gladiators probably also, it's like, oh, I see DP in the chat. It's like it's like no shame. It's like some people are like, oh, I play a cheesy strategy. I'm
right.
I don't agree with that. If a strategy gives you the best chances of winning, you pull off that strategy. Like, who cares?
W to W.
Yeah, W to W. But certain teams are more leaning towards we play the meta game. That's what all the teams have figured out is the best way to play, and that's what we stick to because it's a safe choice. Like when people look at us in stage 3, it's like, why would you bench space? Like that's absolutely insane. It's like we thought that's our best shot at winning instead of playing goats into Vancouver Titans.
Yeah, Shanghai won the stage of that.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, they just did whatever they felt like doing, and I respect that a lot. And coaches that are not afraid to take certain risks. I think that shows that you have confidence in yourself and you know what you want out of the team.
I guess you're all of the school of Monty thought, with the whole Outlaws thing going on. Yeah.
Oh, true. The whole, like, it's the same thing. Like people were criticizing Outlaws for doing something that is out of meta and like saying they would have more chances of success playing the meta. How do you know? Are you in scrims? Like I have hours and hours and hours of data and VODs to judge my opinion based on. Analysts on the Overwatch League desk or even Reddit, you get to see 1 hour of gameplay on stage where I don't actually get to talk to my players, which is like, really? Like, why do you try to do my job with 1% of the information I have? Like every time I read comments like that, I'm just like, you're just silly. What's the point? Like I do this professionally and you're trying to tell me that the decision I made is wrong. I probably know if I made a wrong decision. And sometimes a loss is just out of your hands as a coach. Like you can only influence so much. You can't handhold a player and be like, hey, remember the one spot I told you to put your Sombra Translocator in, don't do it again. They will remember. Like I can't do that in game for them. That's why I don't know if you guys followed CSGO, but there used to be a time where coaches were allowed to talk to their players in game throughout the entire game. The teams kicked the in-game leaders out because what's the point of having someone that is less focused on actually fragging, but more focused on the strategy when you can have a coach standing behind you with all the time in the world to analyze situations and make the best possible decisions. If we had that in Overwatch, the quality of games would skyrocket. If you have coaches actually making the best possible decision at every single given point. But you don't have that. A lot of it is just, oh, your player didn't pay attention for a brief second, got one shot by a Widowmaker, and you lose first point and then get snowballed on 2 CP. Like, that's just how the game works.
I'm just going to say for a second, before Joe, you say your thing, is if you ever need some armchair analysts, promise. Us 3 right here are the best armchair analysts. We're really good at making assumptions, and
I don't mind like people speculating. I just hate the people that are so convinced that they're right. Like there's a difference between voicing your opinion, which I think is absolutely valid. Like anyone is entitled to their opinion of what we do as a team, and they are more than welcome to criticize us. But don't go out of your way to like ask for people to get fired or something like that. It's like every time Dell's Few starts, Zachary, like really? It's like, why would you ask for the coaching staff to be fired? They're working with what they have. Like it's so silly.
Yeah. It's it's a weird, because you talked about CSGO as well, and I was thinking of, okay, what kind of person would I add to a staff?
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious choice is, I don't know if, like, I think this story hasn't been blown up in the entirety of esports well enough. There's this sports psychologist that worked with Olympians in the past. Name is Mia Stelberg, and she was the one that got Astralis on the road.
True.
Like when they were Tilt Lords. She worked with OG, who won TI, and she recently started working with Enche when they started popping off. I think that is a pretty solid, track record. So especially like going into the travel thing, like you say, for instance, okay, I definitely agree that it's like during this podcast, you've often said, okay, some things are out of the coach's hand. Like sometimes players don't do that and that and that. I think this is where the sports psychologist's work starts.
I agree. Yeah.
So do you think that's a valid addition to coaching staffs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like we have a sports psychologist work with our players during stage 4 and some of stage 3, and we're still offering them the opportunity to talk to a sports psychologist even now in the off season, that if they feel like they need to talk about something or they have concerns or whatever, they have someone to talk to. And I think especially like the mental game in general is like right now it's on the coaches to somehow take care of that. Like I don't know how to make a player not tilt anymore. Like I'm not qualified to do that job, and I've never signed up to do that job. And dealing with player mentals is like super. You're walking on a razor thin line. Like if you say a wrong thing or you handle a player wrong way, you could severely damage the relationship you have with that player, and it may result in them never trusting you again. So I think having someone that is actually qualified and knows what they're doing, talk to the players and make sure they're at their best happy mental state at every given point is super important. And I would bet money on it that a lot of teams have lost matches this year based on the player being out of it or tilting or like giving up midway through. I would bet thousands of dollars on that happened. So I think a lot of the teams should look into sports psychologists, but a lot of teams are also not willing to afford a sports psychologist.
Sure. Doesn't get better with travel, right? Most of these have like that's the thing. Once again, we're talking about getting value out of it. Like I think this what you said, right? Like a frontline coach, that you just can't provide as much value. The same thing, we have this discussion even with Baroy about statistical analysis, where it's like, no, you cannot provide like a full-time job statistical analysis. But I think either you got to turn into a hybrid, but it's really hard to then find a sports psychologist that goes on the road with the team, right? Like these guys are most of the time highly qualified, probably command a regular salary that is ridiculous. Put the travel on top, and like it's hard to I don't think it's hard to justify the cost. I think it's hard to shell out for it though. If you're like for a sports psychologist 100 to 150k or whatever they would be asking, right? Like the really good ones. I'm not sure if the same effect can be done over calls. Maybe I'm not sure if that's a possibility.
I think
especially through time zones.
I think a sustainable method is how we do it right now. It's like you pay for individual sessions rather than having someone with you the whole time, because in stage 3 we never felt like we needed someone really there to talk to the players because they all seem overall like well grounded and adjusted. But then you have a meta shift and people's mentals kind of break, and that's where having someone available that you can call and be like, hey, I need you to work X amount of sessions with the player and help him work through that problem might be something that is beneficial. But yeah, ideally you would, in a perfect scenario, I would love to have a sports psychologist traveling with me 24/7 on call duty through day and night. But obviously that's not possible because as you
for
said,
yourself as well?
Sometimes I wish there was someone that I can talk to, like realistically speaking, especially if you join, like I went from MAME Academy, which was probably the best team environment I've ever worked with. We were great friends, hanging out like the entire day, basically 7 days a week. There was never any issues at all. Then I go to Florida Main, which was the complete opposite. There was conflicts all the time. Like, I didn't agree with the way the coaching staff was handled and a lot of other things that came through, which obviously, if you leave a team like that, and it kind of fucks with your own mental as well. Like, if you think you're a good coach and you come from a contender season that didn't go as expected, and then you go into Florida Mayhem and you another loser, nothing is done in the way that you're used to, and then you essentially get fired from the team and you join the next team that is also not performing, that you have to build from the ground up. Obviously, I would have loved to have someone that can help me, like, put another perspective to it rather than your own thoughts, because obviously if you work as a coach, you're like super critical of, or you should be super critical of yourself and the players and your team. So your job is essentially looking for mistakes. If all you ever do is look for mistakes, you surround yourself with negativity all day long. That comes with the job. So having someone available would probably been good, but I don't think I was never at a point where I was like, I need a break right now and I need to talk to someone. I was never at that point. I was exhausted, but I was also happy that we were doing well. Oh, let me just answer DPay's question. How effective has your performance coach been, or your performance coaching has been? I know everyone wants one, but efficiency is hard part since very few people are qualified for so. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's kind of like two questions in one, because I never did any sort of psychology work with my players because, as I said, I'm not qualified for it whatsoever. So me trying to do something like that would probably do more damage than it actually does good. It's like kind of trying to diagnose yourself. It's like, go to a doctor, they're qualified. Like, why would you potentially hurt yourself by being too proud to seek help? I think performance coaching in general, like working with players one-on-one, has been super, super effective for us. Like we wanted to trade away KSF because we thought he didn't have like a DPS player mentality and he wasn't like pushing advantages like a DPS player would. But he also never had someone work with him. So the second I said, like, he was the first player when I joined LA Valiant that no questions asked on the first day, he would just listen to me blindly. Like, he would just follow everything I say. And I think having a player that is that coachable, you could, like, a player can definitely like super benefit from that. If you have there's obviously players where you tell them to do something, they do it right for a couple of days and then they forget about it again. But there's players that don't do that. And I think differentiating between these types of players and holding on to the good coachable players and like getting rid of the non-coachable players is like super impactful. Like, KSF turned from a player that we wanted to trade to Boston to probably one of our best players throughout the entire year, just by sitting down with him for weeks in a row and providing him with pages and pages of feedback. Like, I would sit down and do one entire map of detailed analysis, like written down with drawings and everything for him for like 4 weeks straight, almost every day. And then you have, which I don't think a lot of teams make use of, especially the Korean teams, you can micromanage a lot in game. Like, when I was coaching Sombra to Shax, I would always tell him, hey, it's like, you placed your translocator here, that was good, you should have placed it in this corner. So for him, it's a one sentence message that he's reading in game. But for him in the scrim, if he's ever going to be in that scenario again, maybe the next block, he will probably remember that and be like, okay, I shouldn't place my translocator here because Promise said in the first block I should have placed it here. So I think that's a lot of untapped potential that teams are not making use of right now, where you can micromanage a lot in game. Obviously, you need the right players for it. Some players just can't handle it. Like someone like Agilities, from my experience, he doesn't really do that well, like providing him that sort of feedback live. But someone like Shax or KZF, they thrive in it. Like, they love it. Like, they adapt mid-game. They give me like, when they die, they like type back to me. It's like, hey, I agree. Like, I should have done this. Like, what do you think? Like, there's a conversation going throughout the entire scrim, which I think is like super beneficial. And I think that's a lot of, you kind of have both the super detailed feedback and you have the small micromanaged kind of things to prevent bad habits from forming. And I think if you combine the two with a good structure, you can get a lot of value out of someone that is just dedicated to improving players. Again, I don't agree with the whole tank coach, support coach, and DPS coach kind of thing.
Sure.
I think it's kind of laughable and silly.
Why? Just
because you don't have enough work. Like anyone who's actually coached a team knows that there's going to be players that don't need feedback or very little help. Like someone, it's like Fact in Goats. He's super good, Reinhardt. He knows what to do. All you have to help him is understand the macro strategy and how to make the best possible decision. But then you have someone like KSF who was not good on Zarya, so you needed to start from scratch and build him up. So I don't think having someone that is dedicated to main tanks and having him locked in that role is going to benefit you, because maybe he's in a meta where his front line is doing just fine. What is he going to do then? You can't just go and be like, oh, I just helped the DPS coach, because the DPS coach probably has his own things in mind. And then you have to align two people again. Everything just gets chaotic. Like I like our environment that we have right now, where everyone has like their part of what they need to take care of, but every single person in their part decides what needs to be done. If Stoop thinks there's no point in doing a review after scrims, we don't do a review after scrims. Like he decided that as the macro strategy coach that he wouldn't get anything out of it, so we go home. If I don't think there's feedback to do for Fact, I don't do feedback for. I go to a different player. And I think having these flexible roles and definitions help you have a smooth working environment as a coach, rather than, oh, well, I'm the main tank coach and I can't do anything else but coach main tanks. I don't think it's beneficial.
So from the outside, we hear about the crazy hours. One coach, I'm not going to say who it was, but he's sent a letter to his organization asking his org to please only work 90 hours instead of 100 a week at the start of the season. In that regard, that's two and a half jobs right there, right? 2.5 regular jobs, in a sense. What was your workload like? And isn't it potentially possible that you just go like, hey, we have a role coach here. He works 30 hours and then he works 40 hours. Because if you tell me now that you work 80 hours a week, that's 2 jobs right there, right? I mean,
obviously. I think that's team dependent. Like when I worked on Florida Main, we would sometimes show up in the office at like noon, like 12, and would stay until like 10 p.m., which is obviously not sustainable over a long run. Sometimes the other coaches thought it's necessary. I don't agree with that. I would love to have Overwatch League as a whole shift towards a more 9 to 5 orientated schedule. Like instead of starting scrims at 1 p.m., why can't you put your foot down and be like, players can't sleep in until 12 because they stay up till 5 a.m. playing Overwatch. Why don't they have like certain times? Like, why don't we start scrims at 10, scrim till 12, take an hour break, start the next block at 1 to 3 p.m., do review until 4, and then go home? Like a normal, roughly like 9 to 5 job. Like that's good enough for most teams.
Is that something you'd like to see the front office kind of put in place and enforce? Because like that's not at least uncommon here in the United States for like high school K through 12 sports and NCAA athletes. There are certain times that they can practice. There are certain people who can be in the room when they're practicing in off season. Like, would you like to see some more like, hey, teams, 80 hours a week is not a thing that you can tell your coaches that they need to do?
I mean, to a certain degree, I would love to have someone govern that and be like, okay, listen, guys, you can't have these unsustainable schedules. But at the same time, it would kind of take away from the competitive integrity, I think, because if you as a coaching staff decide that's your best way of winning games, why is there a front office telling me what I can and can't do with my team? Like, I should be the one deciding how practice schedule works. But at the same time, I can guarantee you there's players that are burned out or have started to become burned out, or they're like generally unhappy. We've seen people retire because they can't handle the schedule anymore. And I think that's on teams and coaching not being developed enough. Like there's no streamlined process of this is how Overwatch League coaching should roughly work. And this is what all teams stick to. There's teams that have 12-hour days. There's teams that have 6-hour days. And I think it's up to the teams to decide how they want to schedule. For example, we would go into the office at like 11:30, start review at 12, do it for an hour, scrim block for 2 hours, take an hour in between to review quickly, sometimes only half an hour.
It depends how much we... there.
Oh, sometimes in between blocks we would review for 20 minutes, sometimes for the whole hour. It depends how much workload we have. And then we have another 2-hour block, and then we either go home or we do another review. Like, that's basically just a lot of review and little scripts. Like, we were not a big fan of having like 3 block days, because the last block is usually just a wash. Like, players are tired. They've gone through 3 full hours of review at that point and 4 hours of actually playing the game. So what's the point of adding another 2 additional hours just for you to kind of like pat yourself on the shoulder and be like, hey, we put in the work today, which I think that's a lot of what teams do right now. They put in the work for the sake of putting in the work rather than taking a step back and actually looking like, how much do we get out of these 2 hours? Is it worth it investing these 2 hours? Or is it worth it showing up 20 minutes earlier than usual and get the work that you wanted to do out of the way quickly and have like coaches actually have like a prepared, streamlined process for you ready? So it's like, imagine a teacher shows up to class without having anything prepared for, and you is just like, fuck it, open the workbook at page 12 and just start like working on it. I bet there's plenty of teachers throughout my
trust
class.
me. Yes.
It like happened. It happened to me as well, but it's like you don't get anything out of these lessons. It's much better to have someone come in and have like a streamlined process prepared and ready to go, where you have a red line to follow, rather than putting in hours where you kind of make up the red line on your own, like during review.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'd love to be able to skip video day. You know, I don't want to show up to geometry class if we're just going to watch an episode of CSI, you know, and take notes and do busy work, right? Busy work doesn't teach me anything.
CSI and geometry class?
Oh, yeah. That was just the go-to. I don't have anything for you kids. Here you go.
In
write
geometry? Like
yes.
math?
Yes.
And now people are wondering why Detroit looks like it does. Jesus Christ.
Just saying. It happened.
We don't joke
it's
about
real.
Detroit here.
I don't live in Detroit. I don't know how many times I have to tell this to you.
I saw the map. That's Detroit, my dude.
Oh my god.
It's just like DPay said in chat. You work as much as you feel like you need to work.
Yeah.
So certain teams just feel like they have to do more. Certain teams feel like they don't have to. It's up to the teams, and I don't think there should be someone telling you what you have to do. At the end of the day, we as the coaching staff are responsible for the players. If you harm the players by overworking them, you should be held responsible and fired. That's how it is.
Agree.
Yeah. I will also say some organizational stuff is just either there's fights in between like the upper management and whatnot and coaching staff, or there is no connecting people that actually do real work. So then other people have to chime in. Like there are definitely scenarios where it isn't like, okay, I gotta fine tune those 99.5% to 99.8. No, it's actually if I don't work 100 hours, my team like won't be able to enter the country or stuff like that, right? So yeah, there are weird scenarios, and it's definitely not standardized in the league.
VOD reviews for visas? Is that what you're saying? VOD review for visas?
Basically, yeah. I think for us, it was just like every single chat there was pulling their weight, so it didn't really feel like we have to work that much. Like every single coach trusts each other blindly, and there's like, I would sometimes not do feedback for 4 or 5 days because I wanted to see how players develop on their own, and there would never be Packing standing behind me and being like, hey, you didn't do feedback for a couple days, what are you doing? Like he trusts that I have the best intention for the team in mind, and they don't really follow up with me, and just like I don't follow up with them. Like we keep each other in the loop of what we do, like roughly, but there's no detailed, oh, this is how it's gonna go. Like so some head coaches just like, you have to report to me every single thing you do. And I'm thinking like, at that point, you might as well do my job. Like, what's the point of me going up to you with every single tiny thing I do and say to a player? Like, why do you need to know all of that to do your job as a head coach? I think that's absolutely unnecessary. And a lot of the head coaches are just over controlling and just want to know and do everything, which I understand. Like you, as the head coach, you take responsibility for the team. So you want to feel like you are in control of what the team is doing and how it's going to go. But I think it's kind of unproductive and just takes a lot of time away. Like if
Yeah.
I have to write a report up for my head coach every single thing I do, I'm going to be writing reports half the time rather than actually working.
Yeah. I think the ownership that the head coach should then be taking is just like, I'm responsible for hiring this guy. And if there are no results, that's also on me for not accurately scouting what this guy's capable of, not keeping tabs on him, but definitely like trying to medically apply my coach, like you take 5 grams of this each day. It's like, that seems excessive and also not conclusive to an effective work environment. Even though I understand I think in a sense, it's actually admirable that some people just go so hard and want to know everything that's happening, because that just speaks to me that they want to have a personal responsibility. I think the mindset shift should just be, my responsibility is of hiring people that can do what I want them to do and have trust in that. And if that fails, then I'll also, sure, you could argue that there's less responsibility on you now, but overall, I think the effectiveness is just like, it's a no-brainer to go about it that way.
I think a head coach the head coach is limited by the staff he's working with, which is why every single time Reddit is like, oh yeah, the head crusty or someone is just hard carrying the team. That's not how coaching works. There's no hard carry as a coach. Like, if a team performs well, there's probably a very big chance that the coaching staff as a whole is at least on the same page and kind of follows the same plan. There might be a coach that does very little, and there might be a coach that does a lot. Like Yiska said already, some people have to make up for other people not doing their job properly, which again, is up to the management to decide, which is why if I would join a team as a head coach, I would make sure I get full say of the staff that I hire. Because if you join a team with pre-existing staff and they don't go along with what you want them to do, you're in a lot of trouble, which is why for Packing right now, who's obviously announced as the head coach for next year already, he's obviously forcing or trying to make sure that we get rehired for the next season. So he has the same staff to work with and knows who he can trust rather than rehiring people. I think it's like super important to have good staff surrounding you that you can trust.
Makes sense. I would imagine that it would probably reflect the players. If you have a streamlined system throughout the entire team, it's going to, replicate itself in the gameplay. If you have a fragmented coaching staff, you'll probably have fragmented strategy. So it makes perfect sense.
To answer Deepay's question, do you guys have full autonomy as assistant coaches? Does the head coach help you improve in your coaching and delegate tasks? We do have full autonomy. Like, Packing is not going to tell me what I have to do in terms of performance coaching or individual coaching. Obviously, he has a certain thing in mind. Like, he sets the scrim schedule. He says, this day we have 3 blocks, this day we only have 2 blocks, this day we can cancel a review, or this day we cancel the block. Like, he is still in full control of how the team operates, which is what the head coach should be in charge of. Like, he should be the one deciding of how the team is going to run. But he wouldn't go up to me and say, like, I want you to fire feedback on KSF Tuesday. Like, he would be like, what do you think of KSF right now? Do you think he needs some feedback? If I say, no, I don't think he needs feedback, he's fine. He would be like, okay, I trust you. Just do what you think is best. He wouldn't force something on me that I wouldn't want to do as the performance coach, because he believes in, I focus solely on performance coaching and making sure the players are at. So why would he go out of his way telling me what to do when he's not fully paying attention to performance coaching? Like, he trusts that me paying attention to every single detail means that I know more about the player's current state than he does.
You're there to do that thing, and it's his job to.
Like, there's
you in it. Aspects of your job that he has to know to do his job.
Yes,
but
it's like,
it doesn't mean that he has to know every single little detail.
Yeah, if you were the manager of an IT department and you hire someone to handle your stand and ask them every single thing of how to serve, you hired someone to do that job and they're taking care of it. You obviously ask for a certain amount of responsibilities, like, hey, how's the current state? Like, what are you working on? And then your employee responds, hey, that's what I'm working on. You good. And you go back into your management office. That's how a head coach is for me, or a good head coach should be. It's like, you trust the staff you hired because you believe they can do the job that you hired them for. And you take minimal action in kind of like micromanaging them. And we don't really help each other improve in our coaching because we believe that all of us are good coaches and we have like a fundamental understanding of how we need to coach. Obviously, there's certain things that I do that Stoop doesn't do, and he learns from me, and vice versa. Like, I learned a lot about head coaching from Packing. Like, he head coaches completely different to how I head coach. So for me, it's like, as an assistant coach, it's interesting to see how he handles himself, because if I ever get another head coaching position, I can take the lessons that he learned throughout the year and apply them to my own head coaching. So I think it's just a lot of mutual respect. If you respect each other, you're going to learn on your own and kind of take the good things away and kind of advise each other on certain things that they're not doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think we actually got to get out of here. We've kept you for a long time. Thank you for letting us
coming on.
Yeah, pick your brain on all the coaching things. It's been really
it's been insightful, to say the least.
Yeah, very informative for sure.
Sorry for all the questions that I couldn't answer.
I love that we have DPay in chat just asking these questions.
Yeah, he was asking good questions. I mean,
true.
I'm sure Gladiators does things completely different to how we do things at Valiant. So for him, it's probably also interesting to see how other teams operate.
Yeah, I was like, I almost wish we could just pull DPay.
Just stick them in a room and just record it, and that'd be very,
insightful.
very interesting. Yeah,
a couple of LA coaches.
I mean, I'm sure we would all be happy to have him back on, right? Like if he wants to come on.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think I've ever actually been on a show with him, so it'd be nice to.
What? Were you gone with DPay?
Yeah, I don't think
really?
I don't think I've ever been. I think I've been absent. Yeah, the week that I was gone, I think you guys had him on. So it'd be nice to have a chat.
All right, DPay, you're up next soon.
Then I get to ask some questions.
Yeah,
there you
then
go.
Promise
So you
comes
gotta show
in,
up and chat.
ask the questions. He goes, I had to dodge Volamel.
You know, it is what it is. You know,
we can get the Lord out of here. No problem.
Awesome. All right, well, before we get out of here, Promise, just thanks again for being on the show. It was awesome having you.
It was so much fun.
Incredible insight, as always. Before we get out of here, though, I mean, any like shout outs, anything you want to say to the LA Valiant fans out there, people who, you know, have tuned in to listen to you and hear your insights?
Not really. I think the LA Valiant fans have been awesome through the entire season. Like, even after every single loss, no matter how dumb the loss looked, they were always like, you guys are doing God's work as coaches, keep going. Like, they never doubted us at all, and they were with us all the way, even through the last loss. And even after the loss, we walked out of the venue and there were fans waiting for us, and they were like, don't worry about it. Like, even you getting that close was already enough satisfaction for us, like seeing the season being turned around. So I'm very thankful for the fans being so supportive, rather than some other teams where fans can be quite cruel sometimes.
Yeah, I'd say LA fans in general have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
The teams have done a really good job at like fostering a nice, wholesome environment, keeping that toxicity level to minimums, and it's even reflected in the discords and elsewhere. So, you know, so kudos to LA fans. I think for both Gladiators and Valiant, I think they both have some really great fans. So make sure to follow Promise at Promise_OW on Twitter. Do you do any streaming, any content like that at all?
I'm hoping that I can start at some point, but the season, as I said, every game was a playoff game, so most of the time I come home and work more. And once I'm actually done working, I'm kind of over it. But I do want to start streaming, and I have a stream set up. I just haven't found the time to actually, start.
Awesome. What is that? Is it just at Promise on Twitch?
It's Promise_W again on
Promise_OW on Twitch. Go give that a follow as well. Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again. Joe, Yiska, let's go to Yiska first. Shout outs for the week. Where can people find you, man?
On my Twitter as usual. I think I'll actually do some thinking it over in video format this time. As soon as I get my mini, I think I'll go and start. Baby Blue offered herself up to edit like one of the thinking it overs, just to see figure out editing a little bit. So that should be fun. We'll see. Maybe I'll do some elaborate video essays and play around a little bit with the format. My current idea is to drag it into more a bit of the humorous part, because my theory is the best you can do for content is make it drama. If you can't justify drama ethically, you probably should joke a lot, and we'll see how that turns out.
Awesome. Joe, what about you? Shoutouts for the week. Where can people find you?
Find me on all of the socials at Volamel. That's Volamel. Any updates? I submitted the first draft of my big project, so that is currently being chopped up and looked at. So that should be within a couple weeks being published. I published some Chinese players you might want to keep your eyes on for next season. I know that got to stick with the brand. And right before the show, I published, a budding rivalry that will be coming to a head on September 29th. Sinatra and Hawksall might go back a little bit farther than you think, so go check that out.
Awesome. As for me, you can find me everywhere at KickedTripod, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube. That's where all this stuff gets posted, is youtube.com/KickedTripod. We record live on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time at twitch.tv/KickedTripod. Big thanks to everybody who came out in the chat today. I know it's been awesome having such insightful questions from D-Pay and the rest of the Twitch chatters today. So thank you all for being there for that. Excited. We should have some potential audio upgrades next week. Yiska got his mixer almost today. I put Yiska on the box and they couldn't deliver it. So tomorrow, yeah, it's good. And then Joe's just got the cables coming in. Joe's got the box, so that's gonna be pretty sweet. We're going to there it is, boom. Only like 12 people in the world have that guy, so
saving the box.
Yeah, I'll sign it for you. Just kidding. Yeah, so everything else, thank you to our Tactical Crouch producers, Battle Crab, Maid, and Peter Y. Thank you so much for supporting the show. If you want to support Tactical Crouch, there's 3 easy, awesome ways to do it. Number 1, leave a 5-star iTunes review. It's one of the best ways to help us get seen on podcast outlets. Most podcast outlets also pull that to aggregate where we show up in searches on like Spotify. So 5-star reviews mean a ton. It is September, so you subscribe. If you sub on Twitch, it's half off. Or if you gift subs on Twitch, it's also half off. So you get a sub for $2.50, and any of your renewals from that, I think the next month or whatever, is also half off. So great way to support. Otherwise, patreon.com/tacticalcrouch. We talked about doing maybe some bonus shows and stuff this week to actually go through and talk more about the games from this last week, so we didn't discuss those a whole lot. And that, could be something that we throw up for patrons first, stuff like that. So patreon.com/tacticalcrouch is a great way to just support the show, help us keep the show running, help us get the audio upgrades that we've been working on, and things like that. So,
sure.
All right. That's going to do it for us. A big thanks again to Promise for being on the show.
Thank you.
Love to have you back anytime. I'll definitely tune into your streams. We're out of here, though. See you all next time for episode 53. Yes, there is an after show today. Yes, there is.
What's up?
That was a good one.
Now we can answer all the questions.
Oh, I forgot to stop recording.